Hello, I'm April Jones, and we at Jones Law Firm care about you, your family, and your well-being. That's why we've put together this informative webinar series to answer your questions about life, about the law, about your family. So thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Hi, everybody. I am April Jones with Jones Law Firm PC. I've been an attorney 30 years. We've had Jones Law Firm PC in Colorado for 20 years. We do family law exclusively. We are Colorado's premier family law firm, and I have here today two of my amazing senior associates. I will have them introduce themselves, and then we will get on to our topic today, which is spying on your spouse, what's legal and what's not. So we only have a half an hour, so let's get after it. First, I'll have you hear from Nikki and then Morgan, and then we'll start talking about it.
Hi, I'm Nikki Van Getz. As April said, I'm one of the senior attorneys and we practice exclusively family law. Unfortunately, we are all too familiar with today's topic, and so I'm excited to kind of go over that with y'all.
Thank you, Nikki.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Terrell. I am also one of the senior associates at Jones Law Firm. Before coming to Jones and doing family law, I also did criminal law exclusively. So I can answer questions about criminal penalties or potential criminal charges and how those can impact your family law case.
Which is very important to know. So we are so happy to have Morgan on today. That was a must. We have a question in the chat. One of the attendees asked if we could see them. The question, I'll answer it. No, the only folks showing today are the panelists. So we cannot see attendees and they cannot see each other. So you don't have to worry about that. And let's get after it. Okay, we'll start with, we have questions that were already submitted. Can I record a conversation without their knowledge? That's the question. So can you record a conversation without the knowledge of the person that you're recording? So here's the answer in Colorado. One party to the conversation needs to be aware that the conversation is being recorded. Now, if I'm recording a conversation, a conversation that I am a party to, and I know that I'm recording it, then that satisfies the criteria. Where you don't satisfy the criteria is where if I was recording a conversation in another room that I am not a party to. That would be, what kind of crime is that, Morgan?
So that would be, there would actually be a couple of different things that you could be charged with. You could be charged with eavesdropping. You could be charged with invasion of privacy, both of which are criminal charges. You could also be charged potentially on the federal level with either wiretapping or, again, there is a federal equivalent of eavesdropping as well.
Okay. Next question. Can I read my spouse's emails if I have the password? Who wants to take that one? Nikki.
So I can take that over. So while legally, yes, you can probably read them. Morally and in the way that it would impact your case, probably it's going to be best practice not to do that. We're always going to advise you not to do that, just because there are legal ways and appropriate ways to obtain any sort of information that you are seeking in a manner that you don't need to go through surreptitious means of doing that. And so we're always going to advise, don't go snooping around somebody else's email just because you do have access. To the same point, that's something that you should be prepared to happen to you. And so for that reason, we always advise that our clients do change their password. Once this case is started on any sort of platforms that you may have, you may share Amazon accounts, things like that. Make sure you go ahead and change your password just to make sure that you are protecting your own privacy and also any sort of privileged communications that you may be having with, your attorney or anyone else involving the case. You don't want the other party to be privy to any of that.
Now, Morgan, for you, is it a crime if someone reads emails that they have a password for?
So again, it could potentially be a crime. it's again, depending on the kind of information that you gain access to, it could be deemed invasion of privacy.
Even if you have the password, because that's the
Even
big
if you have the
question.
password. Even if you have the password. And that's really important because like Nikki said, it's super common, for, especially when people are no longer living together. We all have our passwords saved, in our Amazon and our Gmail and all of that kind of good stuff. But yes, if you're accessing someone else's account that you don't have permission to access, and especially with email accounts and you're reading that information, you could certainly be charged criminally with invasion of privacy. So definitely something that you want to be on the lookout for. And it's like Nikki said, it's always best practice to not do that, even without the potential criminal issues that could arise. You never want to come before the court with unclean hands, is how we kind of say it in the legal world. So, you're not going to ever want to come to the court and have to explain how you got a certain piece of information that came from your ex-spouse's or your opposing party's email.
Thank you. Right, here's another one for you, Morgan. Phone recording apps. What if I have a phone app recording all of my phone conversations and it happens to capture an abusive conversation with my ex?
Yeah, and so April, you kind of talked about this already in Colorado. So definitely, and every state is different. So Colorado does happen to be a one-party state, like April explained. If you're a part of the conversation, so if you're having a conversation with your spouse and you're on the phone and you're discussing those topics with them, you can absolutely record that conversation. You're aware of it, and that's the only requirement. And so recording those conversations is absolutely fine. What you want to be aware of is if you're in another state, or your opposing party is in another state, the laws are different. Some states are two-party states where both parties have to be aware that the conversation is being recorded. And so definitely something to be aware of and to keep in mind. But if you both are in Colorado, that's absolutely okay to record those conversations.
Here's a question. I had a case just like this. It's about what happens if your spouse puts a tracker on the family vehicle that you drive. Is that a crime? Is that not a crime? So in my case, there was a protection. They filed for divorce in the typical fashion. And at the same time, wife filed for a protection order alleging that she was not safe because my client she believed he was tracking her in her car. And it later turned out that was the case. And the judge threw it out. We were in court like the day before or after Christmas, something that felt fairly horrible, I remember. And I think it was the day before Christmas. And he said, you are not scared of him, which is a requirement of a protection order. You're not fearful, you're just mad. So he said, move on, nothing further. Well, later, a few months later, and Morgan, you can speak to this, the criminal charges were filed against him, stalking, and so forth. So there was this big criminal case, even though the family law divorce court didn't find that it rose to the level of anything actionable and never treated it that way inside of the divorce. And can you comment on that the dual criminal component, Morgan, and how you can have two different rulings on the very same facts? Because that's a question we have.
Absolutely. So there are not only are there different standards of proof in the family law courts and the criminal courts, but you have different agencies that are deciding what rises to the level of a criminal charge or what's enough for a protection order. And so the standards are always going to be different. It's always a good idea to talk to your attorney about what those standards are. But just briefly, in the criminal court, it's the district attorney who's deciding what charges to file, if it's appropriate to file charges, whereas in the family court, it's the judge who's making those decisions. And so those are obviously two very different entities that are deciding whether or not a particular action or particular behaviors rise to either the level of, necessitating a criminal or a civil protection order, or rising to the level of criminal charges. And so that's the reason for the difference. And that's very common that we see sometimes. Judges won't feel like it's appropriate to grant a protection order because they happen to know more about the background of the situation. In April's case, they know about the background of the divorce, whereas the district attorney is not going to have a lot of that information. They're going to look more at the specifics of the behavior and decide whether or not that rises to the level of criminal conduct.
And Nikki, you can comment on this as well. You have to be careful when you think you're doing something that's clandestine, like putting a monitor on the car, and there's always this rationale. Well, it's a marital property, it's a marital car, it's our car. So where is the harm here? And then I'm not telling anybody. So where's the harm there? But there's always, in this particular case, the guy's best friend told, and it was. He didn't expect it. He didn't think anything was going to happen to him. By the time he got to me, he was already well into he was recording her going to hotel rooms, meeting a guy, and the both of them were about to just explode. The husband and the wife, him from finding out, her from being found out. Like, it just was not a good situation all the way around. And it didn't really help with anything. And so people don't keep secrets, and it doesn't matter that it's your car. Any comments on that, Nikki? Do you find that people think that they won't get caught or no one will ever tell or that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. And, a lot of times people will feel that there's some sort of justification just because something is shared property and their intent wasn't to stalk somebody or harass them, but more so they wanted confirmation of whatever it is. I mean, the courts don't care in divorce cases, in child custody cases. They're not looking for fault of one party or the other. You don't need fault in order for a divorce to be granted. And so those sorts of things end up being entirely irrelevant as to why you're doing it. And really, it's kind of opening the door more so to exposure of, potential criminal liability that just it's not worth it.
Then that anger that the parties are going to keep with them for a really long time, maybe forever, maybe well into great grandparentness, just isn't worth it. The person who's arrested is angry because they're arrested. The person who was tracked and found out is angry that they were found out, and they just kind of tend to hate each other forever. And it's just, it's too much. It's too much to put your family through that. If you feel like you're in a situation and it's not good for you, or you feel like you're being cheated on, don't take matters into your own hands. Give us a call. Let's get through it. Let's work through it. Let's get what's best for you and best for your family, and get you off to a place where you can heal and be emotionally and physically safe. Okay. All right, let's go to another question. Nanny cams. Cameras in the house, nanny cams. What are my rights? Nikki.
So this is an interesting question. I actually had a case pretty recently in which this was a real thing that was happening. The parties just had, they just had a couple of kids. And so they did have concerns, not just, they installed cameras on the perimeter of the home, but also inside the home to make sure that anything that was happening while they were away, they'd be able to monitor that. The problem came up when, after these parties separated, one of them moved out of the house. Those cameras were still installed in the home. And the party who had moved out still was the only one who had access to those cameras. And so he would use the cameras inside and outside the home to monitor the comings and goings of who was coming to the house, what time mom was there, what she was doing with the kids, and that sort of thing. And that became extremely problematic. In that situation, the mother had tried to get multiple court orders to prevent dad from being able to access those cameras, and the court kind of ignored that topic entirely. And we represented dad. Dad was adamant that he was concerned for the well-being of the children. That's the reason he was monitoring. But come to find out, that's not entirely the reason that that was going on. And all that led to was just an escalation of, the animosity between the parties. And that became a divorce that was unnecessarily contentious, I think largely because of that. There was a lot of information that he was discovering that when presented with, hey, this is what's happening. Okay, well, how did you find that out? I found that out because I was watching the cameras inside the home. That's a problem. Because that's not something that presents well in front of a judge, because it does look like you are monitoring, you are stalking. It ends up being information that isn't going to be useful in a domestic relations case, because the way that you're, presenting to the court how you learned that information doesn't reflect well. And so that was not, again, not worth doing, not worth going through those means to access that information, and only really escalated a situation unnecessarily.
Now, if the cameras are in your home and you guys are residing in the home together, and you leave your ex at home, your estranged spouse, but you're still living in the same home with your child or children, and you leave the house, you can look at the cameras and you can watch them because it's your home. You guys have agreed that you have cameras in your home and it's what's expected. So in that situation, which sounds almost the same, it is quite different because it's your home. You are the two adults who've decided that we're going to surveil our home and we're both going to have access to the surveillance. I had a case where mom saw the father giving melatonin to their twin newborns to keep them asleep all the time. She could see him doing it on the camera. And that was something the court entertained, was admissible. The court obviously made rulings about you can't give that to the children and drug the children to be asleep on your parenting time and then say, look at me, I'm a great dad, got it all under control. So it was a big mess, but the surveillance was the thing that allowed my client to prevail with the twins, when if she didn't have it, he was steadily saying, no, I never would do that. So it can go lots of different ways, but the main thing, and you can comment on this, Morgan, is that it's the intent, it's the knowledge, is if you had those rights or if you didn't have those rights. What about having a private investigator follow me? How can I protect myself from a private investigator following me? Morgan, if you can.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a hard question, and I think one that could potentially arise in a dissolution case or a child custody case when the other party is really trying to dig up dirt and use that, especially for parenting, right? As Nikki said, Colorado, in terms of dissolution and divorce, is a no-fault state. So that's not really going to come into play. It's not anything the court is going to consider. But we see private investigators used, especially in cases where children are involved, because one parent is trying to spy on the other parent. And it's difficult, to be honest, to protect yourself from that. There's nothing illegal about a private investigator watching you, unfortunately, and that can be really scary. There are things that you can do to try and protect yourself. It's always a good idea to excuse me, if you think that that's going on, try and be more aware of your surroundings, be aware of what you're doing out in a public place. They obviously can't spy on you when you're in your home, but perhaps you want to be more conscientious of when you're picking the children up from school, and your behavior there, who you're interacting with out in the public area, and really try and keep things more private, as much as you can. And obviously we can't do everything in the comfort of our own homes, but if you're aware of what's going on, just know that it's not illegal to watch you, or to take photographs of you when you're out in public. And that's really the distinction with private investigators. And so limiting and being aware of what you're doing in public versus what you're doing in private, and just being aware that anything that you do out in public is essentially fair game for that person. And so just that awareness can really help, not give the other parent, any sort of ammunition, if you will.
Now, the flip side of that, that's really important, Morgan, thank you, is that you can bring that to the family law court and say that you're being harassed, that you're being tormented, that this is this is in the best interest of your children for you to be followed, that it's not safe. There's a lot of things where you can ask the court to make orders that that not happen to you in a domestic situation. It doesn't make it illegal. It just would make it, in your particular case, once you had a court order that behavior was to be stopped, then it would be a penalty in that divorce case or that custody case in the civil context. So this is once again one of those areas where we can get protections in one court, but not potentially in the other court. And that's why you need to talk to your attorneys. You need to let us know what's going on. It's not enough to say, oh, a criminal attorney said it's legal. Well, you need to talk to us also to say, hey, this is the problem. Is there something else that can be done? What about being harassed under the automatic protection orders? Like, what other protections do I have? This is complicated. This is important. This is your family. You should not go through this alone. If you have any kind of questions like that, we're denverdivorceattorneys.com, and we can take your call and we can help you. Let's ask a chat question. Who do you turn to if your ex uses friends in law enforcement to tap your phone, to hack your email, to get into your Wi-Fi? Nikki. And then Morgan.
So that's, as we kind of went over before, those sort of ways of accessing information are not legal. And so unfortunately, the burden kind of falls on you a little bit to be able to demonstrate that someone is getting access to those things. But there is internal affairs within the police department if you're able to find out who it is that you believe is doing something so that you can report it. And you don't need to necessarily go to the exact jurisdiction this is going on under in order to report that. But that can be difficult if you suspect that someone within law enforcement is kind of using these dirty tricks against you. And it's definitely something that we hear of happening. And it's difficult to prove. And so it really kind of depends on how you're able to demonstrate that is taking place and how it is that you have knowledge that somebody's doing that. Because if you are able to show it, then you can definitely report that to internal affairs within that particular police department or sheriff's department.
So we really like to be thoughtful and strategic. So in terms of Nikki saying, if you can prove it, what we do is we go through and we'd say, okay, why do you think that? What is happening? And sometimes people will say he can just get into my email. Every time I set up a new email, he gets into my email. It's hard. People can think that you're being paranoid, right? But if you actually happen to be married to a person who is tracking you in some way, we kind of walk through it. Well, what computer were you on? Well, was it your iPad? Was it your iPhone? Was it your phone at work? Was it your computer? If we really just kind of sit with what you are tracking and see where we can track it back to, that's how we can discover sometimes, oh, let's go do a forensic examination of this hard drive and find the software that has been tracking you all along. And it's the same thing for if you think someone is in the police force, or back in the day, it was the phone company. People could work for the phone company and pull up people's phone bills. You can still do it now, but it's not the same as when you could just call people on the phone and they tell you the phone number business. But it's the same thing. His sister works at the phone company and she's giving them all my information. If we can track that, then we can go to the court and make whatever the proper allegations are. And then 2, you can also go to the source and make those allegations. Anything you want to add, Morgan?
The only thing that I think I would add is that if that is something that you think is going on, don't feel like you're on your own. That actually is a super common issue among law enforcement. There's a statistic out there that says that 40% of law enforcement officers or personnel will be involved in some kind of domestic violence or harassing or some kind of case. It's a huge percentage. And so don't feel like it's only happening to you, right? You're not on your own. And just because the other person is a law enforcement official does not mean that you don't have ways of bringing that, to the appropriate person, the appropriate authorities. So please don't feel like that's, that you're alone in that situation. It's very, very common. And yes, I see in the comment, firefighters too, first responders, it's very common. And it goes hand in hand with the divorce rates in those particular professions can be very high. And so the likelihood of you encountering something like that, unfortunately is higher than we'd like to think, but don't feel like you're alone in that particular struggle.
Thank you. That's very good, Morgan. Not feeling alone is huge when you're in that situation and you feel like it's just you. So give us a call. We can help you. Find us online, denverdivorceattorneys.com. Don't be alone in this. Let's take another question here. They've crossed the legal line with surveilling me. Now, what do I do to protect myself to hold them accountable? Well, again, when you look at things and you want to be thoughtful and strategic, it really depends on how they've crossed the line, because you can cross the lines like in the way we've talked about today. You can have the nanny cams that Nikki had, where the spouse no longer lived in the home, but was still watching, which has got to happen so much more now with Ring doorbells and ADP. You can see who's opening and closing the garages and all sorts of things. So there's a lot of that monitoring going on. So that's one type. Or you have someone who put a tracker on your car. I mean, how you hold people accountable depends on the way in which they have violated your rights. Anything you want to add, Morgan?
I would say that if you have concerns about that and you believe that that's going on, again, talk to us and we can help you sort of trace back where you think that that's coming from and sort of look at that. And you always have the opportunity or the choice to go to the police, right? And even if they elect not to file charges or they elect not to, pursue it criminally, just having some sort of incident report can sometimes be helpful, and we can use that on the dissolution side. So even if formal criminal charges are not filed, just having an incident report or having a record that the police responded to the home, we can use that certainly on the dissolution side. And the flip side of that is that they do choose to pursue charges against that person. And if they do feel like it meets the criminal standards of that, that's obviously the flip side of it. But make a report. Any time you can have anything documented, the better the better it's going to be in terms of presenting that to the dissolution court.
And here's a great question. Are there legal things I can do to find information that I believe is being hidden from me? And the answer to that on the count of three, 1, 2, 3, yes. So absolutely, that's what we do. That's what we love to do, is go after what is being hidden. So again, depends on what's being hidden, but let's say someone's hiding money. What do you do when somebody's hiding money, Morgan?
So if the other side is hiding money, and money is one of those things that's pretty easy to follow nowadays. And so, we can look at, accounts, and we can compare those, and we can look at, account numbers and follow the money. We can do that. There are ways that we can go through the courts and get that additional information if we feel like things are being hidden. So we can do things like issue discovery and say, I think there's more out there, and ask the other side to turn that over. If that's still not happening, we can ask for the court to find that the other side is in contempt for not turning over what they're supposed to, and we can ask the court to issue sanctions or basically punishments, for the other side hiding that information. So there are legal ways that we can go about that and find out, what it is that we're missing.
And then on the other side, Nikki, what if in this particular situation here, you're married and you don't think the child is yours because you think your spouse is cheating. What does the court do with that? Because there is the presumption that children of married people are the children of the married people. So that's the presumption that the court starts with. What does this person do in this case where he thinks it's not his child and we're saying, don't spy illegally? What legal remedy do you have to see what's going on, Nikki?
You're going to be requesting that a paternity test happen, and there's no reason that a judge would not allow that to happen. If there's any sort of question as to the paternity in a case, whether you suspect that a child is yours or isn't yours, and you bring that to a court's attention, it doesn't matter if the other person's going to object. The judge is going to look at it and they're going to say, you know what, we need to figure out a definitive answer here because we don't know. So let's get science to figure this out for us. So they will order that everybody be compliant in doing a paternity test so that they can determine paternity for purposes of figuring out child custody.
That is correct. We are out of time today. I hope this was helpful. Thank you guys for your questions. And Morgan and Nikki, thank you so much for just being willing to spend some of your time today helping people on this really tough topic. Once again, if you need us, we're denverdivorceattorneys.com. Email us, call us 303-799-8155. People still do use the phone, 303-799-8155. We can get you in virtually or in person right away and figure out what's going on. So thank you, everybody. We will see you next time. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. If you or someone you know would benefit from watching a recording of this webinar or any of our other webinars, they can be found at denverdivorceattorneys.com. Thank you, and keep a lookout for future live webinars, and I hope to see you again.